Hello, welcome to the Stitchopedia. This is Jessie from Jessie at Home. In this video I am going to teach you the alternate stitch using single crochet. It's not an alternate stitch, it's actually called alternate stitch. And I am using Vanna's Choice Lion Brand yarn in this video and an I crochet hook. Now to begin with the alternate stitch, you start off with chaining an even number. Once I get going with this and I've taught you the stitch, I am going to tell you a few variations. As with a lot of the stitch patterns, I start and end this one a little differently than some of the crochet books say to do, because a lot of my crochet books are older and there have been some just some changes in the way that people crochet as time has gone by, and some things that I prefer as far as turning my rows go. So I'm going to teach you the way that I do it, and then once we've gotten going I will tell you a little bit about some different ways that you can turn your rows and a little bit about what to do if you're starting this stitch pattern on top of another stitch, or if you want to start with a foundation row or something to that end. So to begin, like I said, we start with an even number of chains. So I have my slip knot on my hook, and I'm just going to make an even number of chains. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That sounds good to me. So now you are going to skip a stitch and 2 single crochet into the next, and that's all you're going to do all the way across. 1, 2, skip a stitch, 2 single crochet. 1, 2, skip a stitch, 2 single crochet. And just like I usually do, I am working into the bottom loop of my starting chain, but just like I usually tell you, you can of course work into whichever loop you prefer, or whichever loop your pattern happens to instruct you to work into, or a set of loops. You can always work into 2. So skip a stitch, 2 single crochet. Skip a stitch, 2 singles. And that's your first row. Skip a stitch, 2 singles, skip a stitch, 2 single. That's all it takes to go all the way across the row. If your starting chain is too tight as you get going, if things aren't evening out, if it's still kind of curling in, the first row is probably going to curl in, but after you get several rows it should lay flat. If it's not, that means that your starting chain is too tight, and my favorite recommendation for fixing that is just to use a larger hook to make your starting chain. You can't actually fix it once you've gotten started. Like, you do have to go back and start again with a larger starting chain, which is one of the many reasons I always recommend making a swatch first before you start things, because then you'll know on a small scale if your starting chain is too tight, and you'll know to use a larger hook. Alright, so now we've finished row 1. We are going to turn, and row 2 is the row that this is a simple 1 row repeat. So I'm going to show you row 2, and we're just going to continue to do row 2 over and over again until this reaches the height that we want. Now, I do not start with a starting chain. This loop, you see all these pretty little loops coming off the top of our work here? Okay, there's the loop on my hook, and then there's this little loop right here. That's our first stitch, and then the next loop is our second stitch, and then the third, and so forth. So we don't count the loop on the hook. Here's our first stitch. We're going to skip the first stitch, and we're going to put 2 single crochet into the second stitch. So skip the first, 2 single crochet into the second stitch, and then all we're going to do is skip 1, 2 single crochet into the next stitch, all the way across. That's all that this pattern is. Skip 1, 2 single crochet into the next stitch. Skip 1, 2 single crochet into the next stitch. Skip 1, 2 single crochet into the next stitch. skip 1, 2 single crochet into the very last stitch. Okay. And now we're going to turn and repeat. We're going to turn the row. Here's our first stitch. We're going to skip that and we're going to place 2 single crochet into the next stitch. No turning chain, just skip 1, 2 single crochet into the next. Skip 1, 2 single crochet into the next. Going to do that all the way across. I've completed my last stitch. I've put 2 single crochet into every other stitch across on this third row. Now I'm going to turn and work my next row, and I'm just going to work a few more rows here and give you a few little tips and tricks and some information about this stitch pattern. In my vintage books that I have, stitch pattern books that I have, they have you work the very first set of 2 single crochet into the third chain from the hook, as opposed into the fourth chain from the hook, as opposed to into the second chain from the hook. So we skipped 1 and worked into the second chain. They skipped 3 and worked into the fourth chain, and it gave a little bit of a kind of starting chain. And then they have you work the rest of the row as I did. But then when you turn, they actually have you chain 1 before you work into the second stitch. So they would chain 1 here and then start their work, whereas I am just going to start my work by placing 2 stitches, 2 single crochet into this second stitch. You can try it both ways. Again, another good reason for a swatch. Do it one way for a little while and then do it the other way for a little while and see which look you like. I happen to like the way that single crochet looks with a chainless turn, so that is what I do. However, you do what makes you happy. Now the other thing I want to talk to you about is, what if you want to work this on a row of foundation single crochet, or what if you want to work this stitch onto another stitch? You're making something where the stitch pattern is changing throughout the item that you're making, and you want to start working in the alternate stitch and you have been working in something else. It's actually very, very simple. All you need to do is make sure whatever you're working into has an even number. So if you're starting with a row of foundation single crochet instead of a row of chains, you just do an even number of foundation single crochet. If you're making a scarf with a whole bunch of different stitch patterns in it, you just make sure that whatever your last row was before you started your alternate row, your alternate stitch row ended with an even number of stitches. And that way you can add this onto something other than a starting chain. And that's really all it takes. I'm going to finish up this row here and we'll take a look at what this looks like with a few more rows complete. Let's see, one more little set. And, you know, now that it matters, I'm splitting my yarn. Okay, so here we go. I think I've done about 7 rows here of the alternate stitch, and you can see it's just a little bit more textured than a plain single crochet straight across. It gives it a little bit more of a texture, which is fun. It's actually a really nice stitch for something like washcloths that you want to have a little bit of a texture to it. And it's just, you know, if you want something a little different than your regular single crochet. There is no reason why you can't do this same stitch with a half double crochet or a double crochet. I certainly have done so. It works just fine. Same idea, just instead of single crochets you use double crochets or half double crochets. For half double crochet I still don't start with a turning chain, but for a double crochet I usually start with a chain 1 or 2 before I work my my 2 stitches into the second stitch. Right, so there you go. I hope you have enjoyed this video, learned something new, and thank you for watching.